Welcome back to Indyfest 2022. I'm Elizabeth Thompson, the editor of the Nevada Independent, for those of you who are just joining us. I am very pleased to be the moderator of the panel that's about to follow on the state of the cannabis industry. We've been legal now for about 5 years, so I thought the timing was good to have this conversation, and I am delighted to have the three panelists with me that I do. Just to my left, Selby, it's Boyajian.
Perfect.
She's the Senior Vice President.
Executive Vice President and Board Chair of Flower One.
Of Flower One, which is a huge cannabis grow facility here in
North Las Vegas.
North Las Vegas. I took a tour about a month ago, and I was completely speechless. It was an amazing facility.
Thank
I'm going
you.
to ask you some questions about that. Brandon Wiegand is the new-ish president of the Cannabis Compliance Board. Welcome to the stage. I'll be asking you about regulations just shortly. And Aisha Goins has her fingers in so many pies, I don't even know where to begin. We're billing her as a cannabis consultant. She's got all kinds of things going on, but she definitely knows her stuff in this business, so this should be a great conversation. So the first thing I want to ask, I don't know how many people watching or in the audience partake, but probably not all of them. So let's talk about why the three of you love cannabis so much.
I would love to. I get asked this quite a bit because it's trying to understand what led us to get into this industry. I mean, for me, it's a very actually personal reason. My original background, before I would say I did anything in cannabis, I'm actually a licensed, a clinical therapist. So the biggest platform that I kind of started with, and this is personal, is the number one is mental health. And what I now know and believe and understand about what cannabis can truly do for the world. I always say, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but somehow I wanna change the world here because of how much we truly love and believe in the power of what cannabis can do. And then there's so many ways that I think that even coming from, I'm 48, so I grew up in a generation where we were so scared. And I mean, again, I don't even believe now what I used to believe then. It's almost embarrassing that that's kind of where my brain was at. And kind of today, I guess I really take every moment to get the chance to make sure that I infuse the love and passion that I have into the person that I'm working with, because I wish everyone can at least start once. Once you see it, try it, and do it the way correctly. I think that's one of the biggest things. Everybody's first time. Everyone's got a story about the first time they did it. And if you don't get it right. But that's one of the biggest things I would say is I wish I could teach people how to get their first time right. Because after that, you're going to be a believer.
Yeah, I've been a lifelong consumer way before I should have been. It's something that I've used throughout life, and I talk to customers and consumers, and we talk about, recreational consumers versus medical customers or patients, and I really think of the plant as being beyond that. I think people are really on a wellness spectrum, and so when you talk to people who use or quote unquote use recreationally, when you dig behind and you kind of pull back the onion, you start to really uncover, I'm using it for wellness benefits. I'm using it for sleep. I'm using it to help with anxiety. I'm using it to relax at the end of a long day. And I think for me, like a lot of my passion for the plant comes from just the benefits that I've seen it imbue people's lives with. It's a great alternative to alcohol. You talk about going to a party, people drink too much and talk too much. And with cannabis, you smoke too much and think more.
So it's a thinky drug. Aisha, what's your
My story is a little different. I was in ministry before I came into marijuana. So marijuana was against all of the things. You'd go to hell, and I didn't want to go to hell. So I didn't start in the cannabis industry. I like to tell people I fell in love with the business before I fell in love with the plant, because my mentor introduced me to cannabis in the legalization form. And then once I was introduced to marijuana as it relates to business, I didn't want to be a hypocrite, because I like to do everything authentic. So then I had to, I had to test it out so that I could be authentic when I was talking about it. But it was 2012, the first time I had marijuana. And before then, I was actually on medication for anxieties. And since then, I haven't taken medication. So that was 2012. That was September 2012 was the last time I took my anxiety medicine. And I have more relief now, more control of my ideas and my thoughts now than I did when I was on medication. And I feel more. So I wasn't in control of my emotions. And that's the reason. That's what anxiety medicine does. It controls your emotions so that you're in a state of calm and a state of peace all the time. But it also kind of dulls your emotions and your feelings, so you're not having real life moments with your feelings and your emotions. And with cannabis, I'm not having that. With cannabis, I only have to dose when I need it, when I'm in a state of crisis. So I'm in control of my own emotions and my own feelings. And I feel now I'm having real life emotional moments where I'm having joy and I'm having peace and I'm having anger, and I like it a whole lot better. So I'm having a real, true lifestyle change with cannabis.
Okay, great. So we've talked about the product, so now let's talk about the business. So we're 5 years into legal recreational marijuana in Nevada, as I mentioned, and everyone who's been here for a while knows it was available medically. Prior to that, last year the state saw 157 million in change in excise tax revenue, which went into the education distributed school account. By the way, everyone always asks me, where did the money go? It went into the DSA, that's an education fund. That tax revenue was a huge increase last year over prior years. And then the licensing fees brought in about another 5 million to the state, I believe. What I want to know from the two ladies first, and then I'll come to you, Brandon, is taxation working for the industry and the business? Is there anything wrong with the way we're regulating and taxing the industry? And Aisha, why don't I start with you?
Ooh. Yeah. You asked the unlicensed person first.
You're familiar. I can, if you want Selby to go first, I'm happy to go there first. But I thought it might be interesting. What are you hearing? You talk to everyone in the industry. What are people saying?
So, as you pointed out, what I hear often is what's going on with the money. Is there any money? Always. I voted on this so the money could go to schools. Is the money going to the schools? I think that because there's not a lot of transparency on how the money is being allocated. There's not a lot of paperwork being distributed and how the money is being allocated. It seems like, it doesn't really happen. But what I will point out is, because I like to tell people this, when COVID hit, we had the rainy day fund, and the governor was actually able to use those rainy day funds, which came from cannabis money, to get us PPP before other people were able to get PPP, which actually saved lives. And so when we're thinking about how the money is being distributed and when you aren't really sure, that is one of the ways that Nevada benefited from the tax dollars.
Okay, so I'm sure the governor appreciates that. I'll ask him when he's here tomorrow. Salpi, I know you have words to say about this. What's going on with taxation and regulation?
Yeah, I would say at high level right now, especially in cannabis, this is a very hot topic. We are definitely looking at it from over-taxation and over-regulations. These are like the two things we're constantly, I would say, as license holders preaching about and really concerned about, because of in a quick version, it goes down to the way our regulations calculate the taxes that license holders have to pay to the state. So it's based on, it's called a wholesale fair market value tax, which basically means it's taxed in a different way than you would think. You would think it would be based off of your actual sales, for example, and it would be a percentage of that. But that's not the way our regulation is written. So therefore, the way it's ultimately calculating now, especially 2022, because we've seen such a decline in what the values have, and I know Brandon's gonna go with more of the details on the numbers here. But we, right now, because of that, and the change hasn't come yet in the regulations for the taxes, are almost calculating that our 50% of our revenue is literally going to the state in taxes. And that's kind of distressing. What business can survive when the taxes are calculating to be at that rate? And I think that's why right now we're very much yelling and screaming for help, because it's just not coming out to, any benefit to us. If anything, it's a major detriment. A lot of companies are really suffering right now.
So I think, Brandon, I'm going to say something, and then you might get a chance to correct me. So I believe, Selby, you told me when I took the tour and got to know you a little bit better, that one of the problems with the way taxation works is that it's based on revenue so far in the past that it's not fair to the industry players in the present, because those numbers could have changed, and indeed this past couple of years certainly did change a lot. Did I understand that right?
Absolutely. So again, to help understand it, basically, the state collects data from us, the license holders, and we provide information, and it's done every 6 months. But by the time they get the data of the 6 months they're looking at, they do their assessment, and they update what we call the fair market value, which is done every January 1 and July 1. That number is now not reflective of where we are today, which is kind of what happened, because it's exactly that. Based on almost a year ago of data until that actually came to fruition on today's tax rate. So yes, that's basically what that is.
Yeah, in addition, and there's a lot to unpack here, so I'll start and kind of keep on the road of wholesale tax. So in addition to being in arrears, and look, most people look at that and say, okay, well, in 6 months, you're going to get the benefit of the market being suppressed. Maybe the market comes back. The challenge is you've got operators right now that are suffering and struggling, and they may not be here in 6 months. Exactly. And so looking at, is there a better way to structure that tax? Is there a better way to assess it? Is there a better way to approach it that helps the industry and help still make sure that the state gets their tax revenue? The other challenge is that tax is assessed as soon as that product leaves cultivation. Now, you may not actually realize those revenues. You may not even be selling it in actuality. You may be moving it over to a production facility for extraction, but you're still having a taxable event. And that's where some of the challenges come in, is the timing is off, not only far in arrears, but then you're also picking up these tax liabilities before you've actually realized the revenue. So that's, just the wholesale tax is a lot to unpack. If I step back, really go through and look at what is the tax structure that leads to, the price of the product at a store. You've got your wholesale excise tax, which is 15% based on a fair market value tax rate. In some cases, that can go as much as 20, 30, 40% above what you're actually selling it for. That gets baked into the price. And then you've also got a 10% wholesale or a 10% retail tax that's assessed at the point of sale. In addition, most jurisdictions are maxing out their 3% tax, and that can show up at point of sale, or it could be hidden, but it is part of your cost of goods going in. And then at the federal level, when we pay federal income tax, you're also dealing with a 280E, which is a little known tax code for businesses that are considered federally illegal. We can only write off direct cost of goods sold. So your corporate tax rate ends up being massive. A lot of companies are paying well over 50%, 60, 70, 80% on a 280E tax basis. And so when you look at the industry and you see these revenue figures, and you look at billions of dollars being spent, and the market is growing and all this revenue that's being generated, it's great we're generating tax revenue, but in reality, our operators, our licensees, myself, we're not actually making money. Most operators, if they are operating profitably, it's marginal. Most of us are operating marginally in the red. Some are heavy into the red, really with the intent and understanding and hope that we get to some kind of tax reform at the federal level that will help take care of that. That doesn't even get into all the difficulties and challenges of just operating in this business, that you have additional costs. So banking is not as easy to come by, and there's excessive fees when it comes to securing a bank account, if you can even get a bank account. Insurance the same way. There's a cannabis premium that's assessed that also is a heavy tax to pay.
Okay, thanks. So I want to repeat back to you what I think I just heard you said. You're telling me, are we talking about, when you say everyone's operating, or most folks are operating in the red, we're talking about just dispensaries, or also the growers, or just across the board, everyone in the industry? Across the board, everyone in the industry. What's the one thing, if you could talk to the legislature right now, which you kind of are, because I'm sure there are some lawmakers watching, what would you say, what's the first most important thing that needs to change with the taxation structure in your view?
I think number one would just be getting to a spot where we have a partnership. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of tax revenue being generated. It's being done on the backs of the industry. And so it's great, we're generating tax revenue for the state. We've helped diversify the Nevada economy. But I think as operators, we want a possibility to be profitable. So where would I start? I think, one, we need to look at the unlicensed market as probably our largest competitor. So, as a dispensary operator, I'm not looking at other dispensaries as my largest competitor. It's really the unlicensed market. And I would take that approach. So it's not necessarily looking at tax reform, but really looking at how do we support the industry? How do we make sure that the dollars that are being spent on cannabis are being spent with licensed operators that generate tax revenue, that ensure that it's coming from a regulated market? I think if we had that, I could stand the tax structure. There's other challenges. I mean, you look at time and effort billing by the CCB. In 2017, when we legalized cannabis, one of the things that licensed operators agreed to was a wholesale excise tax in order to fund the agency. So they're a fully funded regulator. They are turning around and charging us time and effort billing for every single operational, whether it's an email, whether it's travel to our facilities, whether it's for an inspection, we're getting billed for that after they're already fully funded. So it's not necessarily that there's one silver bullet that I go after, but it really needs to be looked at comprehensively and really, how do we make this industry successful? How do we make sure that it survives, and how do we make sure we don't kill our golden goose?
So I do want to get into the unlicensed market and those issues. So Ayesha, I'm going to come to you, but I want to come back to you first, Selby. One of the things I found really kind of stunning when I toured the facility was as you walked me through every step of the process, and I saw how many different human beings were required to track a plant from being a baby, to being a bigger plant, and then a bigger plant, and now it's moved. And every single time it moves in your facility, and I just named 4 steps, and there are many more, right? Then it goes into a big bag, then it goes into a smaller bag, then it goes into an even smaller bag. Right. And every single time people touch it and it gets broken down, another check has to happen, another sticker has to go on it, correct? So when we talk about costs, it's not just taxation, the checks that are required through every single step. I mean, I was really astounded, actually, and did not realize that that was part of the challenge.
Yeah, I would say the level of detail, especially when we're dealing with ours, because it's also the volume we're dealing with, but all of us are dealing with that. I mean, we've all heard the term seed to sale tracking. That's one of the key points that Nevada was really trying to show that we were great at. And it's always talked about how Nevada's goal was to be the gold standard of cannabis, like we talked about earlier. But it starts with as if the tracking it's one of the hardest things, I would say. Because like you said, literally every step of the movement of the plants in the different stages, and right now I wish I can kind of lay out, there's, like you said, so many stages before we can even get to the plant to the point where we're harvesting it. From there, you got like so many more things that happen. By the time a plant gets from what we call our babies, which is our clones, to the point where it's gonna get into the store of the retail level to get into the hands of the consumer, you're looking at anywhere from 5 to 6 months, depending on what all that went into it. So by the time, and I always say, I wish we had how to tell the future. Especially think about when COVID hit. All the planning, the projections, everything we had all prepared to do, and then that just kind of came and slapped us, and our world literally changed overnight. But you can't stop cannabis. That's kind of the reason why we were where we were. But that's exactly one of the challenges, because it takes so much work to do all of those steps, and all that is costs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Extraordinarily complicated.
Extraordinarily complicated.
And there's a lot of touches throughout the process. Packaging, I mean, I hear frustrations from consumers all the time. It's like, I bought a gram of flour and I got 10 grams of packaging. That's due to regulation, right? That's due to the requirements, and that builds into a cost that makes it difficult to compete with an unlicensed market.
Are we over-regulating? I mean, did we overdo it?
I think so.
I
think it's hard to say that we're the gold standard when you have a flourishing unlicensed market in our own state. I mean, the whole intent was to move those dollars out of the unlicensed market into the regulated market, where it was safe, where it was accessible, and where it generated tax revenue. And we're not succeeding to the extent that we could be.
Okay, so now let's get into the biggest competitor, which is the unlicensed market. Ayesha, I think you won't mind me doing this. I guess I'm about to find out. Earlier when we were chatting backstage, I think I was the one who first said illegal or illicit market, and you immediately protested and said, nope, don't like that word. Unlicensed is the word I prefer to use. Tell everyone why that is, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the unlicensed market.
I like to use the word unlicensed market because the industry hasn't done a good job of creating pathways for those persons with innovation and creativity. So you can't say that they're illegal, because if there was a place where, let's say, they were creating a new shower cap, they would just be innovative and creative, creating a new shower cap, trying to master that so that they can get that into Target or Walmart. Well, if we're saying that cannabis is an industry in the state of Nevada, is an legal industry, and you have creative and innovative persons out there trying to get into the industry, they're just unlicensed. It's not illicit, it's not illegal, because they don't have any pathway. So it's really the industry's fault that they can't get into the industry. It's not the new business owner or the innovation or the creator. Now, I do recognize that I'm sure that the licensees aren't thinking about the young man. I always think about the young man that I know personally. He wants to get his weed smoothies into the lounges. I'm sure they're not thinking about that person. But the unfortunate part is that language has become a key marker for media and for persons to only see that person. They don't see the big warehouse that's packing and cleared out all of the rooms and growing weed. They don't see the big gang people growing weed or selling weed or transporting hundreds of thousands of pounds from California. That's not how media and the regular person sees that word when you use it. They see the young man who just wants his smoothies into the marketplace. So I push back because I want to make sure that we're consistently thinking about that stigma. And I come from the human side of cannabis, not always the industry, even though I do come from industry. I worked with both of these I call y'all young because we the same age, so, you know, I call you older. But I've worked with both of them, and, you know, I was also a person who started this industry. What do they call them, pioneers? I would just say I worked in the dispensary, I opened a dispensary, right?
I call you an OG.
An OG. But I did, you know, I was one of the persons who worked on the counter, worked in management, opened one of the first dispensaries here. So I know what this is like, and there weren't a lot of people that were like me in this industry, and we have to do better about that. We need to be thinking about that. But I do want to ask Brandon and Salpy something specifically as it relates to taxes, because I think there's something that people aren't thinking about when we're talking about that tax. How is that affecting your employment? How is that affecting your staffing? How does the human side of this have to bear the burden of having because I know the number, I think the number is like 36%. They're saying 36% of your business is going to taxes and time and efforts and things like that. How does that affect the staffing right now for your businesses?
I mean, simply put, if you don't have enough cash flow, it's how you operate. We have to operate more lean. You have to make everybody kind of work harder. On top of that, there's still a definite difficulty since coming out of COVID of just finding labor. So there's a couple of layers to that. But I mean, ultimately for us, our goal at least is always to try to run an operation in cannabis that it goes away from some of the stigmas of the corporate cannabis, the large facilities. Just because we're large, we try to really think still kind of where this all started from. So as the leaders of our company, we're really trying to enforce more about the culture behind cannabis and trying to infuse that into our team.
I'm going to ask you the same question, but much more specific. Did you have to lay anyone off over the last couple of years?
Absolutely.
How many?
So when we first started, when COVID first hit, at our peak we had, for example, I think we're almost at 350 employees. I mean, I had to cut at least 100 within that first few weeks as all of this started unfolding. And today, we are still operating lean. We never completely staffed up. We're at about just over 200 right now. So we've stayed lean. And right now, it's the constant A, where do we find the pool of employees? And then B, it's finding the right type. We're really trying to, like I said, make the way we work with our people and what this means about working in a cannabis business something real and meaningful. And we're just trying to be a good cannabis company. We want to be the gold standard, actually.
Yeah.
I want that for us. We want that from day one.
So Brandon, you come at this with two directions, right? Because you're involved in dispensary and now you're also the president. So industry-wide, if you have any employment stats you can offer, that'd be appropriate. And then I'm curious to just your own experience in your own business.
Yeah, I don't have any stats available for me, and I don't know that we have good research to really identify it. I'd say during COVID, I had a very similar story. So previously, I was CCO of The Source. We had 235 employees. We furloughed or laid off over half of our organization coming in as COVID hit. We were able to hire most of those team members back, but we were a leaner team at the end of the day. Not everybody came back. They found other opportunities or wanted to come back. And to answer Aisha's question, I mean, the more we pay in taxes, the less revenue there is to invest in the business, to drive innovation, to offer opportunity, to provide benefits to our team members that they're deserving of, to provide the wages. Like those all move together. The more money's going out the door, the less money I have to reward the employees and provide that. I'm now COO of Thrive, and we're in I think, a very blessed position where I think we are operating marginally profitable. We'd like to be more profitable, but we've been able to offer a 401k to our team with a company match up to 3.5%. And that's unheard of in the industry. But those are the steps that I think as you start to solve some of these issues and you start to make these businesses more sustainable, I think you will see more of that opportunity. And that's also what our workers want. I mean, you hear a lot of complaints about the industry and that, hey, I can go and make more money working fast food. There's a lot of pressures, and we're trying to balance all of those different factors into running a profitable business and being around long enough to survive to see the policy change that we're waiting for.
So, Brandon, there's not quite 100 dispensaries now in Nevada, is that right?
There's over 100. I think don't quote me on this, I think we're around 112, and there's about another 20 conditional licenses that have yet to open.
And we started with 60-something, right?
Mm-hmm.
We started with 66.
So Aisha, assuming that you all by your lonesome cannot convince the state to give out a bunch more licenses, what's the next best answer to the problem that you were talking about earlier, where you've got intelligent, vibrant, creative people who would love to be part of the industry? They cannot, there's no entry for them basically because they can't get a license. So what's next best? What can be done in the current situation and I think what we're really talking about here is equity and inclusion, right? What can be done to invite more people into the industry and get rid of those barriers?
So, one of the things I'm always leveraging is how to help stabilize. I'm a lover of the industry, period, and the people in it. So I'm always considering those licensees, because some of them are my friends, right? So I'm thinking, how does the marketplace stabilize itself along with bringing in new business owners, small business owners? How can two happen at the same time? And so the businesswoman in me says joint venture or co-ops, because those are the most stable business plans. However, the marketplace is not suitable for either. And the way the market is set up, the way the industry, and it's not just Nevada, it's a national issue. We have to be thinking creatively what can happen, not under the guise of what is happening, because I don't necessarily believe licensing in the way that it has traditionally been done is the way to introduce equity and inclusion and diversity. The Small Business Association says that 43% of all new employment comes from small businesses. If we're not creating small businesses, then we're leaving out a huge market of people to get in to new employment opportunities. And with the industry being new, this is one of the places where we should be thinking the most creative, because we can still carve out new avenues. And so what I'd like to see is some straight up and down joint venture opportunities where the businesses who are extra large or who have the space, and they'll say none of them have the space, but I think they could carve out a little bit of space where they can bring in new businesses and offer licensing splits, right? And so instead of this person having to go out and create a new license, they come under the marketplace as it is, get to carve out of what the business is, and then they start that business and pay into the licensing. I think that that's probable. I also think that there is a probability for some co-ops with some of the grows, some of the cultivations, and some of the production companies. This isn't saying that these business owners, these small business owners, aren't responsible or accountable for their own business, but that they have an opportunity to build it so that they can build into something. Because having to start a business right now, and I know we're gonna talk about consumption lounges, so I'm not gonna get ahead of myself. But everyone knows going into a business, that's a $2 million ticket. Like off the back, right now, Aisha Goins, and y'all listen to this. If I want to start a business, I need $2 million. That's just absurd. So in any other business that you want to be in, the cost is minimal, right? You can go and get a loan from the bank. Where I bank at, I can say, can I get a loan? They'll give me $30,000, $40,000. I can start a decent business with $30,000, $40,000. I could get some employees with $30,000, $40,000. You can't afford a door in the cannabis industry for $30,000 or $40,000. So I think as we're considering these new businesses coming in, we have to just be thinking creatively because the cost isn't gonna go down. And I realize that, and I'm not absurd, and I know that I could toot my horn and show up places and talk creatively, but I know the numbers, and I know that that part's not gonna change. But what I think has to change is how we're looking at industry wholly and think creatively because we're still new. We're still figuring it out. We could really, when Salpy says they want us to be the gold standard, Tick will say the green standard. But as we're thinking about the standard, we literally could be the standard for all industries to have to mimic. And if we're thinking about that, we should be thinking what diversity and what inclusion could really look like and what those pathways could be. But no one's taking the time to do that. I am.
Well, you just did.
Provide a couple comments.
Thank
I mean,
you.
there's a lot, and I agree with a lot of what Aisha said. I think first to start, I draw a bright line distinction between small individuals innovating in their house, right, on their own. I think that is what the industry needs, where we want to be. And these large outfits that are, it's trafficking. They're growing off of human trafficking labor. It's a nasty, dirty side of the business. That is, when I talk about the unlicensed market, those are the references I'm making to. Now, to talk about just access to the industry, one of our challenges, again, goes back to federal reform, that 280E tax and the inability to get banking, or the challenges of getting banking, that raises the barrier to entry. The reason you see so many rich white guys in the industry is because they have access to capital. They don't need to go to the bank to get it.
But
they
Brandon,
can go and fundraise.
I want to just challenge you right there because even if it was access to banking, that $2 million ticket, I don't know many people that don't have access now could go to the bank and ask for $2 million. So we use that as a buy conversation, but the reality of it is the price of being in the business is what it is, and that is a large price. And even if they had access to banking, they still couldn't get that money at the bank.
I don't disagree with that, and that's where I think the incubator and that model comes in. The challenge I see there is we have a regulator who is extraordinarily aggressive. And we are 100% responsible for every action taken by any of our employees. And so when you look at as a licensee and you say, look, do I want to bring in some new operators and help them and mentor them and help with the innovation? And you look at the risk that you're taking on that, hey, am I picking up more regulatory risk by doing that? The answer becomes no. And so if we want to talk about lowering the barrier to entry and driving innovation, I think you have to do that through the lens of, again, how do we create a framework and a structure that gives us the results we want? That's a policy discussion that we need to have that hasn't been occurring. And we hear the noise, it's just we need some action. So that's legislative session. I think that's where you're gonna see a lot of the focus is how do we go after reform? How do we make this industry more sustainable? How do we make it accessible in the right ways? How do we lower some of those barriers to entry? How do we make sure that our operators are able to survive?
Okay, so let's talk about Cannabis Lounges because 2 weeks from now, Nevada will open the application window, I think October 14th. Some say at long last, others say, oh no. So let's talk about this. Is this, let's start with you, Brandon. Is this in general, is this a long time coming and much needed? Or do you see it otherwise?
There's a lot of question marks. So I think it is a long time needed. I think just by the extent of we're a tourist-driven economy, we legalize cannabis, we don't have anywhere for tourists to come and legally consume. So I think that is one approach that the Consumption Lounge will take in helping solve that fundamental issue. As far as what do these businesses look like? Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? Are they going to be profitable? I think it remains to be seen. I think I commend the state on how they came up with the structure. It's a very loose framework that allows for a lot of flexibility in what constitutes a consumption lounge. And so,
can you talk a little bit more about that before you keep talking? Like what might they look like? Can you give us some real world examples?
So I think most people think of a cannabis bar, right? Instead of consuming liquor, you're consuming cannabis at this bar. But the way the framework's developed is it could be anything. It could be it could be a live performance venue. It could be a yoga spot. It could be a restaurant. Any business that you take and look at and you say, hey, I want to add cannabis to that, can become consumption lounge. And so I think, when you look at, I think dispensaries are going to look at them primarily as, tasting rooms or adjuncts to the dispensary. But when you look at the independent lounges, there's a lot of flexibility in how you apply that craft. And so I'm interested in seeing what the market comes up with. I think it's going to be very fascinating. I think the ones who win are going to be the ones who take very unique approaches and don't try to just go after the bar model. I think live music and cannabis go together great. I would love to have a live performance venue where you can consume and you're doing it already anyways. Why not give people a legal place to do it? So I think there's all these question marks about, hey, how do you make this business run profitably? How do you make it accessible? And like I said, the way the state did it, there are licenses that are set aside for independent operators, for social equity applicants, and for minorities. And the barriers to entry are lower for those, right? As a dispensary operator, you're paying a $100,000 price tag to secure that license. I think it goes $5,000, $10,000, and $20,000.
Is that right, Aisha?
2,500.
10.
For the licensing.
Are you satisfied, Aisha, that is accessible enough?
I'm going to agree with some of the things Brandon said and disagree with some of the things Brandon said. So I first want to just kind of talk about some of the regulations that I don't think that people are looking to what's going to happen. So the combustible part of cannabis, which means the inhalation or the fire connecting to it, has to be separate from anything else. So when we're talking about entertainment scopes, yes, they can consume. You can consume an edible, and that can be open, and maybe some vaping, but the combustible part of it has to be behind a door that closes immediately after you entry. So I don't know how that's going to show up in entertainment. Another thing that I am proud of with Nevada is that they will be able to sell product at the consumption lounges, at the independent consumption lounges. One of the obstacles that I see is that proprietor will have to buy that product from the retail. I've never heard of a business that buys retail to retail. So I'm interested to see how that is going to show up. That, to me, is a barrier. The price tag on starting the business is going to still be the same, whether social equity or independent, but the price for the application is going to be less for independent and social equity. To what Brandon was saying, it's $10,000 for independent, $2,500 for social equity. And I know some social equity applicants, and I am excited for them, but I have to pair them with investors because there's no money, right? To what Brandon said, there's no access to capital. And so one of the things that my program is doing is we're having to vet investors so that they're not predatory to the social equity applicants. And that itself there's a guy right now that is going around passing out flyers in the hood, asking for people to call him if you fit this criteria. That is what they're farming people. That is what we're looking at, right? And the unfortunate part is I can't touch every single person and tell them this isn't in your best interest, don't do this, come talk to me. And so I think that where the consumption lounges are going to be great for those persons in federal housing. They can now have places to consume. Our people who are coming in to visit us can have places to consume. I am concerned for it as a business model, period, because of the green tax and what that's going to look like to these businesses. When will they, I tell everybody it's a buy and hold license, because what that means is you buy it, you get it and you hold it and you hope something happens. That's kind of what's gonna happen, right? So that's my feedback.
Okay. Selby, I know you're passionate in general about the industry,
Right.
the product, and of course, you've said openly that you're a frequent user yourself. So do you have any concerns about what's coming with consumption lounges, or are you all for it in general? What's your take?
Pretty much what we discussed here. There's looking at it from a business perspective. We're here, I always say, I didn't get into this business not to make money. I don't hide behind that. Like, who starts a business and doesn't want to make money? And we're over here saying, we're hoping we can at least break even. That's literally my goal for this month. Can we please break even this month so that I don't have to keep investing into my business? So there's some dire level of understanding the business perspective. For some of us, I'm one of the original founders, happy and proud as a female. I'd like to think I'm a minority. I'm Armenian, because sometimes people don't get that. And then my other half was African American, male, ex-football player. So we kind of didn't fit the usual criteria, and boy, was it tough. But we did it. We really had to really work to get in with understanding how this is handled, especially in Nevada. It was a definitely interesting road to get here. But I've been in here now 8 years in, and again, very proud to be where I am, but by no means did I ever think it was gonna be this hard. I always say, I've done a lot of things in my life. This cannabis business has been the hardest thing I've ever done, and I would have never, ever thought that. I literally had a 6-month retirement plan here. I'm 8 years in and haven't taken one vacation, and don't sleep at night, because we have to think about how we're gonna make it to tomorrow. Like, who would have ever said that? So there's reality there, but there's also the things that Aisha's speaking about. These are core issues in cannabis because of everything we've been talking about. So is it just the consumption lounges? No. Is it just operating cultivation? No, it's all of the above when you see the word cannabis. As we know, that kind of just was the starting of how this industry got here.
Yes.
And we're all just shaking our heads sometimes. I'm still shaking my head every morning, like, but we're here, like we said, but we're still here, and we're still standing. And literally, that's a goal. And again, like I said, you guys tell me who would invest the amount of millions we've invested to get here, and just be happy to break even this month.
Do you find it ironic that the plant that you use to consume to help with stress now causes all of it?
Amen.
What is consumption? So revenue's down. The tax structure, it sounds like it's maybe needs an update. Is consumption also down? Is demand down?
Certainly. I mean, we've seen it. What happened is COVID, right? Take everybody back, wasn't that long ago. Feels like ages ago. Everybody was stuck at home. There was no competition for discretionary spend. There was stimulus checks that were being sent out to individuals. There was nothing else to do. And we saw that lift in the cannabis industry. And so we're comping against a year that I think had an artificially high demand. Unfortunately, there's a lot of operators that adjusted their sales based off of that demand, and that's where some of the oversupply comes from. And then in addition, again, talk about the unlicensed market. There's been a rapid, massive expansion of unlicensed operators in California with a very heavy yield that came out. Typically October is your outdoor harvest come through, and all that product has been, cascading across the U.S. And we're continuing to feel the effects of that, and we'll probably feel it again this year. But like I said, there's a lot of operators that adjusted their sale based off of this artificially high demand, based off of COVID and where the world was at that point. We've come back, the business is starting to come back, businesses are open, you're competing for discretionary dollars, and we've seen that demand start to settle down.
Okay. We've got about 5 minutes left. I want to ask sort of an open-ended question of each of you. You're all very knowledgeable, obviously, in the space in which you operate and outside of it, it sounds like, actually. So tell the audience and everyone watching on the live stream, what's one thing about the industry, the system, the governance, whatever it may be, that you think they don't know? Like, what does the public not get or not know that you really want them to understand? Because ultimately, when you start, Brandon, lobbying the legislature, public support plays into that, right? So what do you want, why don't you go first? What do you want people to know?
I'm first?
Yeah.
Sweet. I'd say, again, it sounds like whining and complaining, whinging and moaning, but the business, the industry is not profitable the way the individuals think we are.
Everyone assumes, right? I mean, I certainly did,
and
even
I get
before
it.
I met Thelpy, that there's just gobs of money flying around, everyone's making money, everyone's doing great, right? I think the public does assume that, and that was the case to a point, right? And then.
Yeah, so you see these billions of dollars of revenue and you think, these operators must be making money. I mean, there must be a ton of profit built in there, and it's just not the fact. And so I think starting with that understanding helps then start to have the discussion on why do we need reform, and how do we generate, and what are we going to do to approach it, to approach it. And again, going after the unlicensed market and talking about the unlicensed market and acknowledging and realizing that, look, it wasn't just enough to legalize cannabis. There also needs to be a disincentive to deal with the unlicensed market. We need to create barriers that help, and education, I think, for individuals and consumers to understand why should I be purchasing from a licensed dispensary versus the unlicensed market. It's safer product. Again, it generates tax revenue. It's the right thing to do. It's what the state voted for and what our voters voted for. Let's make sure that the industry we've created now can survive and generate the tax revenue that we want and helps diversify the Nevada economy.
Selby?
Yeah, as he was speaking, I was also thinking, I mean, one thing I always say is we signed up to be in a regulated business, and cannabis is a very regulated business. And sometimes I think that to me is the one piece that I would say I wish people understood more of. The way in which it's regulated, it's as if we love what we grow, we believe in it, we use it, and we're passionate about it. But sometimes it feels like what I'm doing it's a poison or something because of the way they treat it and how it's supposed to be handled. And cannabis hasn't killed one human being. It's not even close to the things that we can speak on with some of the other things, such as alcohol, because we like to compare ourselves to the prohibition and how alcohol was and where it is today. And guess we're years away from that, but we shouldn't be. We shouldn't be. If you truly understand what cannabis is and what this plant is about, they've got it all wrong. That's my opinion.
Okay, Aisha, you are going to get the last word.
Yeah, I'm gonna go a little off script here. I think, because I'm thinking about what they don't know, right? I think one of the things that people should know is there is still a medical market. I think that is something that people think because we went retail that there isn't any medical anymore, and that's just not true. You can absolutely still be a medical patient. There are dispensaries that are still selling to medical patients. One of the things that my org and I are focused on is ensuring that those persons on probation and those persons on parole have medical cards so that they can consume and it's not considered a crime. So if you're out there and you're thinking there is no medical market anymore, they've kind of derailed from what the whole point is, that's just not true. There is still a medical market. And then the other thing I think that people don't know is that there was just a ruling that marijuana can no longer be scheduled as a Schedule I. Now they haven't decided who has the authority to schedule it or to reschedule it, but right now it absolutely is not a Schedule I drug in the state of Nevada.
Okay, I'm curious, I probably should know this, but so in the medical marijuana realm, will a doctor prescribe it only, say, like as a pain remedy, let's say, like if you're fighting cancer, or will doctors prescribe it for anxiety, which is something that you had mentioned earlier?
So the doctor won't prescribe because that goes against their HIPAA. But it takes a doctor to tell you that they can recommend it to you, and then you would take that information and get a medical card. But in the state of Nevada, there are 13 reasons why you would qualify to be a medical marijuana patient.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, great conversation. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your time and being part of Indyfest and talking about this new and burgeoning industry. So can't thank you enough for being part of the conversation. Thank you all for staying with us. We're going to take a break, and then up next, John Ralston is going to interview our dear friend and colleague, Major Garrett, Washington correspondent for CBS, and his co-author, David Becker, about their new book, The Big Truth. So stay tuned for that.